Hey there. Welcome to White Women Wake Up.
I'm Jonelle.
And I'm Karen. Together, we're diving into real, unfiltered conversations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, privilege, and inherited patterns. We're here to challenge norms, unpack our privilege, and foster empathy through raw, intergenerational dialogue. It's not always easy, and we don't always agree, but we show up anyways. Hi, Jonelle.
We did not agree last time.
No, we didn't agree.
But we are showing up.
Yeah, but I think we agreed on the idea of not having erasure.
Yeah. I mean, we still don't need to agree on everything.
No.
It's just about, and again, in my reflection, I'll go with my reflection last week, was, again, where am I still seeing growth in my life? And that was clearly a place that, like, you know, I still see growth in my life. We have come so far in our relationship, and we've always had a great relationship, but so far in these conversations that, and I think this is very common with anything in life, when you get really far in a place, you can kind of assume you'll never backslide a little bit. And so it's just interesting how triggered I got.
Yeah, you got really triggered. I wasn't triggered at all.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. And, you know, I think one of the things that we're trying to do here is be curious, be open, agree to disagree. But okay, so the agree to disagree is an interesting one because I also don't want to be dismissive. And I think that can happen sometimes when we kind of say as a community, I'm going to agree to disagree with you, because sometimes it can act like I don't really care about the topic. Yeah. And that's not the goal here, because I think I really respected what you were bringing up. I didn't actually disagree with you. I actually learned from our conversations. So, and what I unraveled in that conversation was you were trying to say, why are we using it as a place of celebration? Yeah. And that's what specifically—
Instead of education.
Yeah, instead of education. And because it, as a full narrative story, we want both.
Yeah.
And yet, to celebrate one over the other feels dismissive.
Or just to celebrate that at all.
Yeah, to celebrate it all.
Is awful. Education is great.
Yeah.
Honoring is great. Those are all different things, but celebration and romanticizing are not what we need to do.
No.
I think—
See, you're just so better than I am at your specific language. I tend to generalize things, and so I wasn't probably hearing— when you said the word romanticizing, that's a specific definition, and I was lightening that definition.
Yes.
I wasn't listening probably enough, to be honest, which is one of my challenges.
I appreciate you saying that, because this is something, and we even experienced this in a couple podcasts ago, where I'm like, where I did a typical trigger where I'm like, you're not listening to me. And this is something that happens often, listeners with us. And what I've learned over the years, it's not that you're not listening, because you get frustrated with that. You're like, I'm sitting here, I'm listening. You're not understanding what I'm saying. Yeah. And I think that's where, and I corrected that at the moment, but that is something that happens a lot. You do listen. You try really listen. It's the disconnect of sometimes misunderstanding what each other are saying.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting that you're saying that, because one of the ways that I learn it is then after, when we get off, I'm like, oh, I didn't use nationalism correctly. Yeah. Or like, now that we're even reflecting on what you talked about last week, what you were talking about was this idea of romanticizing. That was actually a really key indicator of the conversation. Yeah. And I didn't even repeat that. I mean, I listened to our podcast afterwards, and I'm like, I kept talking about other things when in fact what you were really talking about was romanticizing.
Yeah, and why do we romanticize tragedies?
Yeah.
It's quickly going back, because I know it's your topic, but this is still good reflection time. You saying agree to disagree, and I completely agree. I completely agree that saying can often be dismissive, but I also think something that frustrates me about that saying that is not dismissive, it also allows people to dismiss facts. So I think, especially in our society today, where people are really associating opinions with facts, and having different opinions is different than agree to disagree. And so I think, especially in the conversation that we're having, agree to disagree. And that's what I was trying to get last time, that you were like, well, we can have different opinions. And I'm like, no, this is not about opinions. Like, factually, I mean, there are opinions in there. I agree. But if we're looking at growth as a society, there really is only one path there kind of thing. And so that agree to disagree of this, and I'm not saying you said that, but I think in these types of conversations, it's hard for me to have an agree to disagree on a lot of this stuff kind of thing. Because, okay, let me step back because I don't think I'm saying it right. I can see on your face that you're that's
actually,
not...
I'm trying to think of what I have something I want to say about that, but I want to wait.
Yeah, so stepping back, I actually think what I mean when I agree to disagree is because we're talking about other people's lived experiences most often in these things and how other people, and so we as white people, when we say agree to disagree, it is truly dismissing the other experiences that we're talking about. So it's not even taking into account my own opinion. Like, I'm not saying this is my own opinion. I'm saying this is fact of these lived experiences. And so that's why I think it is tricky with these conversations of it can't be an agree to disagree situation.
I think what you're saying too, or at least what I'm hearing you say, or at least what I'm taking away from, is how important it is to distinguish. So one of the things that I could say to that is, these are the facts. I have an opinion about those facts. That's truth.
Yeah.
But then but by stating that, someone sees that I've acknowledged the facts.
Yeah.
And yet my opinion around those facts are simply my opinion.
Yes.
Because everyone has a right to an opinion.
Totally.
But to change facts is what we're confusing.
Yes.
We're really confusing that now. And we're calling the language of opinion truth.
Yeah.
And we're actually getting our language confused.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that your neurodiversity has benefited you is that you're really careful about the language you use.
Yeah.
And you're careful about how you define that language. I think I am not careful, or I assume I understand what something means, or I haven't interrogated what that means, and I use it casually, and it gets me in trouble.
It does, but I have to say, something that you really do is, like you said, you take a lot of reflection on it. And so this is something that you've always done, but especially in the last couple of years of really kind of understanding, instead of just assuming that you knew, you do take reflection on it and see where might I learn something else. And so I think that's a really strong attribute you have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This isn't compliment time, everyone.
Okay, so speaking of reflection, I think what my topic is going to be interesting. You know, one of the things that Jonelle and I are trying to do to divvy up tasks is Jonelle is doing all the blog writing. If you haven't gone onto Substack or our blog page and started reading some of her blogs, they're amazing. But I'm committing to doing a lot of the reading.
Yes.
So I've been spending a lot of time reading books, and I don't think I've even recommended this book yet, but came across it, called Decolonizing Therapy. I've been reading the book Louder Than Lies that we did recommend, and it is really about the Asian American experience. Ellie Yang Camp wrote the book, and it's beautiful. And I think her dialogue around history and colonization probably sparked my interest in doing this book, Decolonizing Therapy. And this is really good, too, by Jennifer Mullan. And I'll put that in Instagram later. But anyways, both of these, again, naive. I've spent a lot of time.
You are naive.
I'm naive.
Not the authors.
Naivety. I've spent a lot of time looking at my discipline, which is design, and decolonizing my design curriculum. Well, duh, wouldn't every discipline be able to decolonize their discipline? And so this decolonizing therapy is what sparked it. So in order for me to have this conversation with you and I had to go back to our mission statement, which is we're going to have discussions on bias. Okay. Yeah. So if we agree on what bias is, which is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person or a group compared with another, often unfairly, it can manifest itself in various forms. So that's a definition, conscious or unconscious, explicit or implicit, institutional, and so forth. So we're having conversations around bias.
Yeah.
I want to go a little historically deeper and have the conversation around colonization. Because the more that I've been reading these two books, the more that I am really, not that I wasn't aware, but I guess becoming more explicitly aware of what colonization has done to my, and actually in my research, the result is it's left me unimaginative.
Yeah.
Unimaginative of where my futures can go.
Yeah.
By learning about what happens in colonization.
Okay.
So again, I'm going to give definitions. If we look at colonization, it is the process of establishing and maintaining control over territory or people. Often for the purpose now, and I think this is really important because I think some of the language out there, or the language in her book, she uses the colonial mindset.
Yeah.
And this is what we own today, because when we colonize, it's typically for exploitation, settlement, or trade. Doesn't that sound like capitalism?
Yeah.
And I mean, it actually sounds so much about the way that I think. So this control could be political, economic, cultural, typically involves subjugation with existing population. So we could go colonization in one way we understand it with First Nations or Indigenous persons. So that's the obvious, right? But we could also say, is that what gentrification is? Or we can also say, oh, I see it playing out between what's happening in Gaza right now, that they're being exploited, that they're being taken over their territory, and so forth. So I want to do one more history thing. Are you doing okay with this?
No, I love all of this.
So again, these books aren't specifically about colonization in the historical framework, but I wanted to understand it so that I could figure out where it came from.
They're about the impacts.
The impacts. So one of the ways, and we can see that it's dominated through history forever, but maybe this is related to our other podcast with white Christian nationalism, is the doctrine of discovery. Do you know what that was?
No, tell me about it.
Hey. You probably do know about it, but it wasn't ever really called that in your histories.
Got it.
Do you remember the Mayflower and
obviously.
Columbus?
Yes.
Well, Columbus the doctrine actually was written in 1493, even though Columbus came in 1492. But the doctrine of discovery was done by Pope Alexander VI.
Okay.
So we see that it's already religious and political, and the kings of Spain. And it basically it was a document that basically blessed Columbus and the other explorers in the late 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s with the legal and moral justification for European colonization and displacement of indigenous peoples. It granted European nations the right to claim and take control of lands not inhabited by Christians, effectively deeming indigenous people as non-existent and their lands as vacant. So this was really ordained. And so you can, rightfully so, you can see why people have said, maybe we need to stop celebrating Columbus Day, because our United States was built on this doctrine. So this doctrine ended up really reinforcing what we now call today as colonialism.
Yeah.
Colonialism has taken its form into white European morality, ideology. So much so, like I was telling you the other day, I wasn't even thinking about that, but if Europe is the middle, we're the West, and anyone that's east of Europe is the East, right?
We call Asia East.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're the Western,
So anyways, what's interesting, so I wanted to kind of talk about this language of what happens when we look at our colonial biases and how it's shaping our minds today, all of us. And so our cultural imagination.
Okay.
It has what it looks like for us white communities. Our stories, our curriculum, our media, everything is European. Discoverers and settlers are the protagonists of histories. Everybody else is not. They're the antagonists. They were non-existent. So the other one is our relationship with the land.
Yeah.
We act as if we came here, we own it, it's ours. And you can still see it playing itself out, right? We're going to see people take over Gaza. They're going to say, our land, that's our territory. And now you assume the way that we do our religious cultures and so forth. We see it with Ukraine. We see it with other things. But the other thing that it does is now this is the part that I want us to really talk about, is it also puts us in a framework of scarcity and otherness.
Okay.
So if we had to colonialize, we had to make these colonize these countries because we wanted more. We wanted more spices. We wanted more trade. We wanted more money.
I see.
We wanted more land. That means we're already assuming there wasn't enough
for
where
us.
we were.
Yeah, currently.
And we have already projected that we have value. So because of our value, we can take from others.
So interesting.
So what I want to talk about...
That part I understood,
what I wanted,
the scarcity mindset.
So the conversation is... I went on a long time, a really long time. But the conversation, I guess the question is, as I'm unpacking this to you, and as you're hearing this, and you're hearing it from hundreds of years of methodologies and normalization and ways and ideologies, how do you think about that in your own life, or where it centers around business and all the things that you've done in culture?
So I think, again, very different than you. None of this is new to me.
Yeah.
Thinking through this, understanding how colonialism, capitalist patriarchy has shaped our society is something I think about pretty much on a consistent basis. I think, and I don't know if this is more my generation than your generation or more me personally as an individual, but like you said, colonializing therapy, decolonize.
So that's it. That's the next step.
So decolonize.
How do we work to decolonization?
Yeah. And so, anyways, and so that is something that. So, anyways, that topic is not new to me. I think the thing that you did say that was new and interesting to me, this idea of scarcity mindset, is what really kind of fueled a lot of that. And obviously, there's a lot more to that, like power, hungry, but I never think from the perspective of. I always think from the perspective of power, not scarcity breeding. And that's so interesting because they talk so much about the scarcity mindset with an individual and how that can affect individuals.
But that's why
kind of perspective on life.
Thinking as well, because it's all individualized, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's not my point. But my point is, and so I had never thought about that from like a societal lens of when you have a society that thinks in a scarcity mindset, how that affects and creates just a greed, capitalism, overturning of productivity. And then again, like you said, fear.
It seems very fearful.
Yeah, fear-driven. So anyways, that's something that I learned from.
So it's interesting, too, because even as you're saying this, I think about the days that when we used to celebrate Columbus, right? And what we celebrated was his idea, we just celebrated the language of discovery.
Yeah.
We didn't celebrate what Columbus's real goal was, right?
Yeah.
It was to maybe discover lands that maybe the same way you or I may travel today because we want to see different cultures and things. But his real goal was trade, profit, or the real goal of that system. Let's even talk about that system, because the system funded him to go get spices, funded him to go take over lands, funded him.
They funded him to go to India.
And then he brought disease. So it's interesting.
He went the wrong way.
It's interesting when we talk about this, by unpacking and unlearning, not only what the good part of his story, which was to discover, bring back these ideas, but the ultimate motive of his story, when we don't go deeper and look at the ultimate motive of his story, we don't realize how embedded those philosophies and that ideology still exists with us today.
Well, and I have to say, this, I think right here is a perfect example of the core differences of our upbringing. Of if you had stayed in the Midwest and you had kept me in potentially Midwest schools, and this is generalizing, but I'm assuming, versus an upbringing in a Seattle public school, we never fully celebrated Columbus. There was a lot of clear distinction.
I think that was also your generation.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I still think it was early for our generation. I think that's a very Seattle liberal public school.
But I think what's so interesting is, for someone my age, no one told us really why we're not celebrating Columbus. We kind of figured it out, but really when by this language of colonization, for me, and going back and looking at these histories, is yes, he discovered land. Yes, he discovered things, just like if you and I go travel, we discover some beautiful things about travel. He discovered some things.
Discover is a tricky word.
It's a tricky
because
word.
You're right, because he didn't discover.
His motivation.
And we wouldn't discover by traveling. We would learn.
Or also, we just promoted that he found the world was round. We didn't talk about that he also found out how to exploit people, how to take from people, how to rob.
And again, I think where I was trying to say with my point is, you keep using the we, and this is what I'm trying to separate. Is
my generation.
But not even just, but like what your understanding of it is, because that's kind of what I'm saying is like I learned differently. But I think what's interesting you brought up about your generation wasn't explained why we did Columbus Day and why we didn't, and whether they were or not. I think some of the bigger issues, and it kind of goes back to the last episode we were talking about, is like, so much of this white culture is that people just get mad, like, oh, you're taking away another thing. Whether they really care that much about Columbus Day or not, or they're educated, it's about this like taking away from your generation, this like, and again, that's a fear mindset, or it's a change.
And it's interesting because I think that this is also, and this is taking me down a little bit of a different path than I was going to go, but in our conversation, I think this is a really good example, and we were talking about it last episode, when you don't tell the full story. Because I do think, as discoverers, as scientists, the idea of looking at the shape of the world, looking at maps, looking at cartology is very, very interesting. And also, what they were doing is trade was not a neutral subject, right? Because they weren't really trading with they were taking spices. They were taking these ideas. They weren't really trading in a way that an Indigenous person would benefit from.
In that they didn't come in with the intention of learning and understanding from the society and culture that was already built on this land. They came in and with the intention of
impose their own values.
And I think that's what you're trying to get at, is it's fascinating how that culture continues.
Well, it continues
to this day.
It does. So what if we had actually done that differently? What if you and I, so instead of maybe,
and then how did we think we even had the right to just just take land.
Yeah.
And the idea that the King of Spain gave them the right. Like who
gave him the right?
Yeah. And stuff. But to your point, it's like I think so often we can look at those in historical terms and not connecting them to modern day terms like Gaza. Because you would be like, oh, well, that's so ridiculous. No one would do that nowadays. That's exactly what we're doing in Gaza.
It a resort.
Exactly. Yeah. But not even that. That's exactly what we've been doing to Palestine for decades now, is taking this land, claiming it for someone else. And
still doing it. We're doing it in Puerto Rico.
Yes,
I mean,
we're doing, yes, exactly.
Yeah. But this is where, and then what now I'm actually getting more frustrated, not with you, but just my own educational system, because I have the capacity to think yes and, right? So I could have celebrated these early scientists, these early explorers, and I also could have understood how trade, how greed, how exploitation has a disadvantage to humanity.
Oh, yeah.
And not only did it have it, like, in the end, what benefited me more? Knowing that the world was round, or all the biases that I have inherited from these hundreds of years of, like, racial social construct came about from this doctrine of discovery, right? Or like my still fear, like the scarcity mindset.
Yes.
These, like, I didn't go in to Americas and ask them, hey, can you teach me about land? And land in a way that I could propagate it so it lives for centuries. Instead, I said, hey, this is how I'm doing it. Do it my way. And so it's really sad that our educational system didn't say to you or I, or didn't say to me at least, I think you have the capability of learning both stories.
Well, or here's the deal. Like, I think what I hear you're saying is, yes, we have a lot to work on with our educational system, and it's horrific where it's even going modern day. I mean, there's so much because, like...
Yeah, we're erasing it again.
We're erasing it again because states have the right to literally do whatever they want. It doesn't even need to be factual truth. That's another point. And so you're right. From an education standpoint, we have so much that we need to do as a country to make sure we're giving critical thinking to our students.
And one of it could be, and this is the point is, I would actually like us to critically think about the colonial mindset.
But that's not my point I'm getting at. I agree. We can put that on. And I think so often as well-meaning white women, we say that. Let's put it on this, put it on that. Like, these systems need to do a better job. But I think what we're trying to do here is internally, what can we do as a better job? And what I think, or like, how can we grow? And I think what I hear you saying is also, why, as a critical thinker, did you never critically think about what you were taught as a kid? And so I think those are some of the things I think the internal viewpoint is, there's so many now new perspectives out there that we critically think about all the time. There's new things coming, but have we taken time to just, like, unpack some of the initial things that we learned early in life, kind of thing. And so I think that's actually more what I would kind of say.
That's really interesting, Jonelle. And I have to say, that's what keeps happening as I'm reading all these books, because I thought of colonialism, I thought of colonizing, but I haven't really thought about the colonial mindset and how it's affected me and still affects me every day of my life.
Well, and
so wait, I want to, before we wrap up, I have a couple things, because this is a little challenging. So what are, like, different ways that we can look at a colonial mindset? And one thing you were talking about, or not look at a colonial mindset, but look at ways in which we can really step in to decolonize. That's because that's our goal. Is to decolonize
our mindset.
I've worked on decolonizing my discipline in design. I've really listened and incorporated different stories, but I haven't thought about, am I decolonizing my life? Am I decolonizing my therapy? This is a great book for people interested in therapy and therapy practices, a life changer. But one of the things that they're trying, so for example, land acknowledgement. And we're seeing land acknowledgement over and over. We usually will go to a large, conference or something, and someone will give us a land acknowledgement. But one of the things that is really part of decolonizing is reparations. So are you and I love this term nowadays, greenwashing, right? This idea that giving our money, I'm not giving any money to like the Salish Indians right now that my land sits on. And so, or my house sits on that land. So one of the things going beyond just saying I know it, but actually
taking action towards
it. So reparation. The other thing is reauthoring your daily narratives, like your holidays, the things that your work, like I'm sure with fashion, decolonizing fashion, decolonizing the stories in which you tell, and things like that. The media.
But how do you suggest people do that? Like, how do you decolonize the stories that you tell? What does that look like? What does that mean?
I think it means looking at different narratives. So, for example, a book that I think I'm going to recommend, I haven't started reading yet, but it's called The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's the one that wrote Braiding Sweetwater, Braiding Grass, Sweetwater Grass, that we recommended. And that book is a great one because it helps you think about the Indigenous mindset. But the Serviceberry is abundance and reciprocity in a natural world. So I think for me, unpacking, I can say one way that I've tried to unpack it is looking at, we talked about like bodies, we've talked about expectations. And if I'm constantly looking at things through a white, women-centered, Eurocentric framework as the standard, I need to change that. I need to open up my standards. So I went to a concert last night, and beautifully, they sang a beautifully Africana song, and they had a white woman sing it. Now she's beautiful, beautiful voice. And I happened to be sitting with a bunch of my Black friends, and they loved it. But there were plenty of Black performers in that concert that I think that they could have maybe, I don't know. This would be something that so I thought about it as I watched it. This would be something that I'd actually really love to hear from our listeners. You know, is that a way of rechanging that colonial narrative? And so that would be one way, is reauthoring your daily lives. And then obviously we've talked about this, but transfer power in the rooms you control. So where do we re-give power in our spaces? So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up. And for me right now, it's just, I'm reading a lot, and it's making me open to things I hadn't thought about.
I love that.
Learning
and that's
to
the point, to grow. Well, thank you, Karen.
Was that okay, or was it too teachy?
No, I mean, I think you gave us some great historical perspective there. And so hopefully the listeners will get a lot out of it too.
I hope so too. So if you're looking at like a key word in this, it's the language of a colonial mindset. You know, how are we how are we decolonizing a colonial mindset? So maybe a reflection this week is that. How are we working on decolonizing our life?
Perfect.
Because it's embedded. The other language in that is imagination, because as we move towards decolonization, we can begin to imagine a different way of living. Like, I know your generation, many of you are like, I don't know if I can be corporate anymore. I don't know if I can work for the quote unquote man. You know, I need to really rethink about that. And so what does that look like? So anyways, decolonizing our narratives.
I love it.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparks something in you, whether it's reflection, a new question, or a deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can also connect with us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Substack, or at whitewomenwakeup.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and let's keep waking up together.
Bye.
Bye.
Great one.
I always like look super serious. I don't think of
you
me
get
as
really intense, but it's the same way. I don't think how my voice
you're really
sounds
funny.
how my voice though can sound so condescending. I can see how people think that of me. But the same as you get really, like when I edit these clips, you're really like,
I'm really serious. And I love serious conversations. So am I like this all the time?
I don't know, maybe. But my favorite part is like when you say I take bad like clips of your face. And like it's really hard sometimes because you're really like and I'm like, well, there's not a lot of options.
Yeah, I know. It is funny because, I'm always Zooming with my class and, I record
Yeah.
these classes and I always feel like I'm being nice and this, and inevitably I'm like,
One time I remember when we first like when the pandemic first hit and we were doing like online Zooms for the first time, like I had to start taking off my picture because I'd be like, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" It'd be so
yeah,
distracting in the
yeah,
thing because I'd
yeah,
be like,
yeah,
"I am just using my
yeah.
hands too much." And then one time I remember like a screen froze and so it captured me with my frozen look like I was talking to my like boss at the time and my look and it captured it as like and you're
I
like,
know, it's
oh
always
my
funny. I know,
gosh.
it's always funny.